Yo, what's up guys? Alex here again from Elite Football Conditioning, and today I'm coming to you to talk to you about the dreaded hamstring injury. Now, one of the more common injuries, and the reason it is so horrendous and difficult to deal with is because it occurs generally at very high speeds, and also the chances of reoccurrence are quite high if you fail to rehab properly. And it can be one of the most frustrating injuries you'll go through because people don't understand how to rehab it properly. You don't know whether you're doing too much. You don't know whether you're loading your exercises the right way. And chances are the exercise that you're doing might not actually be that beneficial. So the first step, and this could be a really big topic, I'm going to be posting loads on this over the next couple of weeks because there are so many different components to it. I've spoken before about posture, pattern, placement, your general positioning within movements, and how you contact the ground when you're running, when you're sprinting, when you're changing direction. And there are so many different variables to it. And the first one that I'm going to talk about in this particular video is generally related to your posture. Now, a lot of the time we end up kind of sat down like so. Or if I tip this over, hold on, like this, and we end up with our hips fixed in that 90-degree position so that when we stand up, we're generally locked in and really, really tight through the hip. Now, the problem with this is if we have tension on one side, the ability is going to create tension on the opposite side. And the ability that muscle then has to contract is going to be limited. It's going to be inhibited. So what you've got massive hip flexors which attach from your thigh bone into your lumbar spine. And that is what helps to bring the knee up in that sprinting position, or if you come back to that seated position where you're 90 degrees at the hip, that's what that is going to do. That's the job of your hip flexor, or your psoas, to be a little bit more technical. Now, if that stays locked on, if we don't release that, if we don't stretch it, that means that we're tight, and if whatever happens on the other side, that muscle is going to be restricted. In this case, it's the glutes. Now, your glutes, I will generally refer to as your engine. That is your power center. That's where your strength and your speed is going to come from in that hip extension. More hamstring injuries generally occur because the movement isn't being driven through the glute to extend the hip. It's coming from the hamstring, and surprise, surprise, the other area that impacts on is your lower back. So if you've got lower back complaints, that's probably a good indicator that your hamstring flexibility is going to be limited, and therefore your hamstring is actually going to be dominant when it comes to sprinting, which we do not want. We want it to assist in that hip extension movement, not drive it. That's the difference. It's going to be there to help the glutes and allow them to kind of help you pull back from here, but that should be glute driven, not driven by your hamstrings on the back of your leg. Now, to loosen this off and to help with this, a couple of really, really simple stretches. So number one, we're going to go kneeling hip flexor stretch. So you're going to take a knee on the ground. If I do this side on, you should be able to see. So if I was to stay relaxed where there's no tension on that muscle there, and that's a resting position, that's similar to being in that seated position, what I'm then going to do is squeeze the glute to push the hip through and tilt my pelvis underneath me. I'm going to squeeze and hold for 5 seconds and then relax. I'm going to go again, squeeze and hold for 5 seconds and then relax. I'm going to repeat that for around 5 reps and then I'll change leg. The reason that we don't want to just jam this one on and just dump the hips through is because it's just going to cause us tendon issues and issues around the hip that we don't need. We don't need to be pushing it that far. What we want is to squeeze the glutes. We get a bit of activation from that, and that will give us enough of a stretch here. That's going to help loosen up that hip area. And then the other one, which I really like for this, is the world's greatest stretch. And I have got a full video on these. So for this one, foot up to the outside of your hand, and the important bit for you to see here is that you start with your back knee on the floor. That's probably a more comfortable position. Squeeze that back knee up, and you're going to hold there. You should be able to feel a bit of a stretch through that back hip. You're going to be pushing depth and range through this front leg. You'll get a bit of a hamstring stretch there, so you've got good hip mobility, which is what we want for sprinting. And then we can rotate, we can bring some upper back movement in, drop the elbow, and then we can get a little push back and stretch those hamstrings. So typically, we don't just want to go, right, well, my hamstrings are tight, what I'm going to do is just stretch them and crank the nuts out of that stretch. Not going to do us any good whatsoever. So if you can stretch the hips out and just account for the overall mobility in that area, in and around the hip, that's going to be a very, very good starting point for you. Now, what I'm going to do in this next sort of series of videos or posts on Instagram that you might be following is I'm going to post about the things that affect hamstring injuries, which you can't do anything about. I'm going to be posting about the things that you can do, or the things that affect or cause hamstring injuries, which you can do something about as well. And 3 big ones on that, so you need to stay tuned for that. I'll also be talking to you about my favourite exercises for it and some of the most effective and the best ways to not only avoid the injuries in the first place, but then rehab them afterwards. For now, start on these. And if you want to skip ahead, if you want to kind of revisit some of the previous content that I've recorded on your posture, pattern, power placement and all that kind of stuff, that's a really good one to do. If you want to look at any of my hip mobility videos, they're another good place to start. That will give you a little jump on what's coming up next. So feel free to come and take a look. I'll speak to you soon. Take care.